Black Panthers armed and ready. We ain't afraid. Old white ladies. We're ready too. We're just talking about the death of the gentleman today. I think his last name was Preddy. Yes, Alex Preddy. Yes, that's absolutely right, Moonbeam. That is absolutely right. ICE is a federal ICE is a federal agency under DHS. DHS is the Department of Homeland Services. Department of Homeland Security. And ICE is a 2004, I believe, creation. I'm just going to make sure I have that. I think it's 2004. 2003. Okay. And your question, and cops are local. So cops, you have your local cops, you have your city cops. Like each city has their own police force. Minneapolis has a police force. After the George Floyd protests, it was slimmed down a bit, so I think they're at 500. ICE generally used to focus on criminals in the interior of the country. So they would work with local police to obtain and deport criminals who had been convicted of crimes. That was what they did, primarily. DHS works, border security works on the border, and so ICE is a federal agency. It is not a state agency, which I think is the big difference. Maybe people who aren't from America don't understand the difference between federal and state. Each state has its own National Guard, and it looks like Walz has deployed the National Guard. I'm not sure what's going to happen next. So I'm just going to, there's this article about the history of ICE. So the Department of Homeland Security was created in 2002 after 9/11, okay? And prior to that, there was a group called the Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS. I remember that from when I was a kid, because I traveled abroad once when I was a kid. Okay, so the INS handled border inspections, deportations, visas, everything. And then there was customs enforcement on the other side. But after 9/11, everyone freaked out and they declared the Department of Homeland Security. And the original INS was dissolved. And so the Department of Homeland Security was created, INS was dissolved, and the functions of INS were split into three groups. ICE, which was created in 2003, internal enforcement, okay? CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, that's on the edge of the country, and that's where most of the deportations under Obama occurred. And then there's USCIS, which is Citizen and Immigration Services, which is for visas, green cards, and asylum, okay? So ICE is inside the country, okay? ICE is inside the country, and Customs and Border Patrol is on the, I'm learning this as we go, because I know this kind of, but I'm learning more as we read. Customs and Border Protection is what we think of as like the border police. Okay, and then then you have ICE. So you have those three branches underneath, since INS was dissolved, okay? And then under ICE itself, you have two more branches. So ICE itself splits more. So if you imagine a tree, you have the Department of Homeland Security at the top, not a tree. What am I thinking of? A flow chart? I don't know what I'm thinking of. Okay, so you have, you had Immigration and Naturalization Services, and then after 9/11, you got the Department of Homeland Security, the big thing at the top, Department of Homeland Security. And Department of Homeland Security is divided into three groups, one of which is ICE. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about, just ICE. So one of which is ICE. ICE itself is split into two further groups. Homeland Security Investigations. Okay, that's involved with human trafficking, financial crimes, cyber crimes, internal investigations, and smuggling. So those are their jobs. Homeland Security Investigations is a sub-split of ICE. The other side of ICE is called ERO, Enforcement and Removal Operations, arrests, detentions, and deportations. This group, ERO, Enforcement and Removal Operations, is what we're talking about when we talk about ICE. And it's a federal group, okay? But that makes it a little more clear, because when we think about ICE, people are like, oh, so you just want open borders? It's like, no. ICE is about internal, like, investigations. It's supposed to be investigations before they deport them. But what it's turned into is a brown shirts, basically. And they're going everywhere and just randomly chasing children down the street and tackling them. I mean, I don't know if you've seen that video, but that was pretty awful. Yeah, so that's the history of ICE. So yeah, so when you're talking about like with somebody, your like right-wing uncle at the dinner table, who is like, well, you know, you just want the illegal aliens to come in and take over our country. When we talk about abolishing ICE, we're talking about this particular Gestapo. Okay, we're not talking about open borders, and that's a whole other discussion about whether you agree with that or don't agree with that, whether you think borders are a fiction, which some people do. He didn't have a gun out, Johnny Smith. His gun was in his holster, and it was legally licensed and obtained, and it was still in its holster. So, well, it's not that they were given more power. I think they always existed. They existed under Obama as well, but they were used more judiciously. Under Obama, he still had high deportation numbers, but mostly along the border. Whereas under Trump, instead of most of the deportations happening around the border, he's using ICE as his personal revenge military to go into states, Democratic states that he doesn't like, and target their immigrant populations. So if this was really about immigration, he would go to Orlando, or he would go down to Texas, where the immigrant population is much higher than it is in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which has a primarily Somali immigrant population, but most of them are citizens. So he used the daycare fraud as a pretext to sending his Gestapo in. But he doesn't really need a pretext anymore. He just sends them where he wants. They're going to Maine next, and they already are in New York City. They're going to Philly. So they're going